Hi, welcome to First Chapter Friday. My name is Lucy, and the book that I will be reading the first chapter of today is called Show Me a Sign by Clare LeZotte. Show Me a Sign is an historical novel which is about a girl, an 11-year-old girl named Mary Lambert, who lives on the island of Martha's Vineyard in Massachusetts. And the book takes place in 1805. And Mary, like many of the people that she lives with on the island, are deaf. She lives in a small community with many deaf people. There was, in fact, a deaf community on Martha's Vineyard, and there was a person named Mary Lambert. Her grandfather was one of the people to come over. He was also deaf. And in Mary's family, she has a father who is deaf and a mother who is hearing. She had a brother who was also hearing, but he died before the beginning of this book. And this is something that Mary feels a lot of guilt about. The book changes course when Mary gets taken by a scientist who wants to examine the root of deafness and does it with a lot of prejudice and the belief that people who can't hear are less than hearing people. And that's one of the things that this book explores really well. The book also looks at racism in the sense that the people who live on Martha's Vineyard are living on Wampanoag land, and for some people in the community, that's a point of strife and difficulty. For some people in the community, they're working to make sure that their community is inclusive of the people that were there before them. So it's an interesting examination of that relationship as well. And a lot of the Wampanoag people there can sign. A lot of the hearing people can also sign. Most of the people who live in this small community can use sign language, whether or not they are deaf. There was, in fact, a sign language that was used at this time on Martha's Vineyard called Martha's Vineyard Sign Language. It might not be something that a lot of people know about, and it's not used any longer, but this book is a great examination of that language. There are notes at the end that the author includes to discuss Martha's Vineyard Sign Language, to discuss the island itself. So if you want to get the sense of the real history at the end, that's provided for you. This book is very well written, and LeZotte's portrayal of Mary Lambert is very thoughtful and sensitive. LeZotte herself is deaf, and Mary also loves to create stories in her head. She's a very imaginative character, so that is an interesting part of this book. And ultimately, it's her strength of character that helps her get through the situation where she is being researched for science. So, without giving more away, I will read the first chapter of Show Me a Sign by Clare LeZotte. And I'm actually going to start with the prologue and then read chapter 1. Both are short. Prologue. If you are reading this, I suppose you want to know more about the terrible events of last year, which I almost didn't survive, and the community where I live. Every small village must think itself perfectly unique. I now know there was not another like ours in America in the year of our Lord, 1805. For those who take hearing and speaking for granted, our way of life may be hard to understand. You may be fooled into believing that Chilmark on Martha's Vineyard, an island south of Boston, is a fancy of my imagination, or the lost paradise that the English captain who named the land after his daughter was seeking long ago. I've tried to be true to every detail and do justice not only to my friends and family, but also to my enemies. It was the stranger invited to our shores who changed my view forever. I warn you, there are accounts of great wickedness along with hope in these pages. As for my mastery of the language, I will remind you that not every writer comes to English from the same direction. My story is built not with brick and mortar, but by finding the right words and making events come to life. If it were a palace, it would have many windows and doors to see your reflection, peer into, and walk through. I hope you will be brave enough to enter. Mary Elizabeth Lambert. Part 1, Chapter 1. I like to walk early in the morning before I begin my chores, even in this crisp November weather. I use my birch stick to poke at curious things on the ground, like the tunnels made by moles. They go so deep they churn up the sand below the soil. When I leave home early enough, I can see bright flashes from the gay headlight in the distance. But today the sun is up. I run my stick across the top of the mossy stone wall that frames the high road and watch the sea glitter behind gabled houses with sloping yards. Seagrass borders the sand, blowing lightly in the cool breeze. Blue crabs burrow into the mud near the shore, where they'll lay dormant for the winter. On the beach, there's little left of the humpback whale that washed upon our shores 4 days ago, delivered by the Almighty. My closest friend, Nancy Skiff, and I discovered the whale while playing. It was already dead when we found it, but its smell was not yet putrid. Small seabirds pecked at its carcass. Its sea-worn, mottled black skin was covered in humps and bumps. We were awestruck by its massive bulk. Nancy and I walked a large circle around it. I collected scallop shells, moon shells, and quahog shells and put them next to the whale as a final offering from a human friend. Nancy took a recorder out of her cloak and played a song to guide the beast to its end. When Nancy and I ran to get her father, my papa, and the other men, they came with spades, knives, ropes, and wheelbarrows. As they made plans to dispose of the whale, Papa, sensing my sadness, signed to me assuredly, "Not one piece shall go unused, meat for the whole town, oil for our lamps, and baleen in the beast's mouth for brushes." I couldn't watch as our treasure was flensed, cut, and taken away piece by piece. I stop and write whale in the sand with my stick. I love words, but they confound me too. The way my mind thinks is not just in signs or English words and sentences, but in images and a flow of feeling that I imagine resembles the music I've never heard. I watch the tide leaping in and out. I pass a stretch of high road that I have come to avoid. I circle around it as if it is hallowed ground and head back home. Leaves jump and twirl ahead of me. The wind beckons me toward a small graveyard. I choose to ignore its silent whispers. And that's the end of chapter 1, and that just gives you a tiny glimpse of the world that Mary Lambert lives in. And Mary Lambert herself, she does love to write. She has a really creative imagination. And as you can hear from that chapter, the book is, as I said before, beautifully written. If you read this book and you enjoy it and you want to hear more about Mary's story, there is a second companion book called Set Me Free that you could also give a try. So that is Show Me a Sign by Clare LeZotte. Thank you for joining me.